The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty courtyard of the Double Eagle Ranch as Alina Martinez wiped flour from her weathered hands on the apron tied around her waist. She had been up since before dawn, kneading dough for the day's bread and preparing breakfast for the dozen ranch hands who would soon thunder into the kitchen like hungry wolves. At 26, Alina had already seen more hardship than most women twice her age, but her dark eyes still held a spark of defiance that the frontier had yet to extinguish. She pushed a strand of black hair from her face and glanced through the kitchen window toward the main house, where she knew Thomas Hartwell was already awake, probably standing on his wraparound porch with a cup of coffee, surveying the land that stretched as far as the eye could see. Alina had worked at the Double Eagle for 3 years now, ever since she'd fled south from Colorado with nothing but the clothes on her back and a heart full of bitter memories. Thomas had hired her without questions, perhaps recognizing the same haunted look in her eyes that he carried in his own. Thomas Hartwell was a man carved from the very stone of the mountains that bordered his property. At 32, he commanded respect from every cowboy in 3 counties, not through fear but through the quiet strength that seemed to emanate from his very bones. His ranch was the largest in the territory, built from nothing through 15 years of backbreaking work and sacrifice. Yet for all his success, Thomas was a solitary figure, a man who kept his emotions locked away as securely as the money in his safe. The kitchen door burst open, interrupting Alina's thoughts as Jake Morrison and 3 other cowboys stumbled in, their spurs jangling against the wooden floor. Jake, the ranch foreman, tipped his hat to Alina with a grin that never failed to make her uncomfortable. "Morning, Miss Alina." Jake drawled, his eyes lingering on her in a way that made her skin crawl. "Sure smells good in here. Almost as good as you look." Alina turned back to the stove without responding, her jaw clenched. She had learned long ago that engaging with Jake's crude advances only encouraged him. The other men shuffled awkwardly, sensing the tension but unwilling to challenge their foreman. Alina served them their breakfast in silence, counting the minutes until they would ride out to tend the cattle. As the cowboys filed out, Jake lingered behind, positioning himself between Alina and the door. "You know, Alina, you've been here 3 years now. Seems like maybe it's time you started thinking about your future. A woman like you shouldn't be working in a kitchen her whole life." Alina's hand tightened around the wooden spoon she was holding. "My future is my own concern, Jake. Now if you'll excuse me, I have work to do." Jake stepped closer, his breath reeking of tobacco and whiskey from the night before. "Come on now, don't be like that. You and I both know there ain't many options for a woman out here. I'm offering you security, a chance to be more than just hired help." The lady said no. "Jake." The voice came from the doorway, low and controlled but carrying an unmistakable edge of authority. Thomas Hartwell stood framed in the morning light, his pale blue eyes fixed on his foreman with an intensity that made Jake take an involuntary step backward. "Boss, you were just leaving," Thomas said quietly. "The cattle won't move themselves." Jake's face flushed red, but he knew better than to argue. He pushed past Thomas without another word, his boots echoing angrily across the courtyard. Thomas watched him go before turning to Alina, who had resumed stirring a pot of beans with unnecessary vigor. "You all right?" he asked. Alina nodded without looking at him. "I can handle Jake Morrison." "I know you can," Thomas said, and something in his tone made her glance up. "But you shouldn't have to." Their eyes met for a moment, and Alina felt something stir in her chest that she hadn't felt in years. Thomas cleared his throat and looked away. I came to tell you that we're expecting some buyers from Denver next week. Important men. I'll need you to prepare something special for dinner." "Of course," Alina said, grateful for the return to familiar territory. "How many?" "6, including myself. Something that will impress them. Show them that the Double Eagle is a place of quality." Alina nodded, already planning the menu in her head. Thomas lingered for a moment longer, as if he wanted to say something else, but then he touched the brim of his hat and walked away, leaving Alina with her thoughts and the lingering scent of leather and sage that seemed to follow him wherever he went. The days passed in their usual rhythm of hard work and quiet routine, but Alina found herself increasingly aware of Thomas's presence. She noticed the way he always thanked her for meals, unlike the other men who simply ate and left. She observed how he worked alongside his hands during the busy seasons, never asking anyone to do something he wouldn't do himself. And she couldn't help but see the sadness that lived behind his eyes, a grief that matched her own. Elena had come to the Double Eagle running from a past that still haunted her dreams. In Colorado. She had been married to a man who had seemed charming and attentive during their brief courtship, but had revealed his true nature once they were wed. Marcus had been controlling and cruel, using his fists to enforce his will when words failed him. Elena had endured 2 years of marriage before the night when Marcus had come home drunk and violent, and she had finally fought back with a cast-iron skillet. She had left him unconscious on the kitchen floor and fled into the night, never looking back. The shame of her failed marriage and the fear that Marcus might someday find her had kept Elena isolated, unable to trust or open her heart to anyone. But something about Thomas Hartwell called to her, perhaps because she recognized in him the same careful walls she had built around her own heart. The evening of the dinner party arrived with the first hint of autumn in the air. Elena had spent 2 days preparing, creating a feast that would showcase not only her skills, but the abundance of the Double Eagle Ranch. She had roasted beef that melted off the bone, prepared vegetables from the ranch's own garden, and baked pies that filled the kitchen with the scent of cinnamon and apples. As the sun set, Elena heard the guests arriving, their voices carrying across the courtyard as Thomas welcomed them. She smoothed her best dress, a deep blue wool that she had bought in town with her carefully saved wages, and checked her hair in the small mirror above the wash basin. She told herself that her extra attention to appearance was simply professional pride, but her racing heart suggested otherwise. The dinner was a success. Elena served each course with quiet efficiency, listening to the men discuss cattle prices and railway expansion while she moved through the dining room like a shadow. She noticed how Thomas commanded the conversation without dominating it, how he listened carefully to each man's concerns and offered thoughtful responses. This was a side of him she had never seen, the businessman and leader who had built an empire from nothing. As she served the apple pie, one of the Denver buyers caught her hand gently. "Ma'am, I have to say this is the finest meal I've had outside of San Francisco. You're a treasure." Elena blushed and murmured her thanks, but she felt Thomas's eyes on her intense and unreadable. When the evening finally ended and the guests had retired to the guest quarters, Elena began cleaning up the dining room. She was stacking plates when Thomas appeared beside her. "Leave that," he said quietly. "You've done enough for one day. It's my job," Elena replied, but she set the plates down. Thomas moved to the window and looked out at the star-filled sky. "Those men want to buy cattle from me, but they also want to know that I'm established, that the Double Eagle is built to last. Tonight, you helped show them that." Elena joined him at the window, maintaining a careful distance between them. "Your ranch speaks for itself, Mr. Hartwell. You've built something remarkable here." "Have I?" Thomas turned to face her, and in the lamplight, his face looked younger, more vulnerable. "Sometimes I wonder what the point of it all is. You build something, but for what? For who?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning that neither of them was quite ready to acknowledge. Elena felt the familiar urge to retreat, to protect herself from the possibility of pain, but something in Thomas's expression kept her rooted in place. "I think," she said carefully, "that sometimes we build things because we have to, because the alternative is standing still, and standing still means dying inside." Thomas studied her face in the lamplight. "Is that what you're doing here, Elena? Building something?" The use of her first name sent a shiver through her. "I'm surviving," she said honestly. "Same as you, I think." They stood in silence for a long moment, the weight of unspoken truths pressing down on them. Finally, Thomas stepped back. "Good night, Elena," he said softly. "Good night, Mr. Hartwell." But as he walked away, Elena whispered, "Thomas," and the sound of his name on her lips felt like a prayer. The next morning brought unwelcome news. Jake Morrison rode in before dawn with word that rustlers had hit the north pasture, making off with nearly 50 head of cattle. Thomas's face was grim as he assembled the men, and Elena watched from the kitchen window as they rode out in pursuit of the thieves. For 3 days, Elena went about her duties with growing anxiety. She had seen enough violence in her life to know that confronting rustlers was dangerous business, and the thought of something happening to Thomas filled her with a fear that surprised her with its intensity. When the men finally returned, they brought back most of the stolen cattle, but also a wounded Jake Morrison, who had taken a bullet in the shoulder during the fight. Elena helped tend to his wound, her hands steady despite her personal feelings about the man. As she bandaged his shoulder, Jake grabbed her wrist. You see what kind of life this is? Alina, he said through gritted teeth, a man could die any day out here. You need someone to take care of you. Alina pulled free of his grip. I can take care of myself, Jake. I always have. Later that evening, as Alina prepared a simple meal for the exhausted men, Thomas appeared in the kitchen doorway. His clothes were dusty and torn, and there was a cut on his cheek, but his eyes were alive with an intensity she had never seen before. Are you hurt? She asked, setting down her knife and moving toward him without thinking. Thomas shook his head, but he didn't step away as Alina reached up to examine the cut on his face. Her touch was gentle, professional, but the proximity made them both acutely aware of each other. Alina could smell the dust and sweat on him, could see the exhaustion and something else, relief perhaps, in his eyes. I kept thinking, Thomas said quietly, while we were chasing those rustlers, I kept thinking about this kitchen, about coming back to find you here. Alina's hand stilled against his cheek. Thomas, I know it's not right, he continued, his voice barely above a whisper. You work for me, you depend on me for your livelihood. But I can't stop thinking about you, Alina. I can't stop wanting. What? She whispered. What do you want? Instead of answering with words, Thomas cupped her face in his hands and kissed her, gentle at first, then with growing passion as Alina melted against him. For a moment, the kitchen disappeared, and there was only the two of them, finally acknowledging what had been building between them for months. When they broke apart, Alina was breathing hard, her cheeks flushed. This is complicated, she said. Thomas replied, his forehead resting against hers. But I'm tired of being alone, Alina. Tired of pretending that what I feel for you doesn't exist. Alina closed her eyes, fighting against the voice in her head that warned her to run, to protect herself from the possibility of being hurt again. But when she opened them and saw the vulnerability in Thomas's face, she made a choice that terrified and exhilarated her. I'm tired of being alone too, she whispered. Their relationship developed slowly, carefully, both of them aware of the delicate nature of their situation. Thomas was a respected rancher, a pillar of the community, while Alina was a hired woman with a mysterious past. They met in secret, stealing moments together in the early morning hours or late at night when the ranch was quiet. Thomas showed Alina parts of his land she had never seen, taking her to a hidden valley where wildflowers bloomed in impossible profusion and a small stream wound through cottonwood trees. It was there, sitting on a fallen log with the sunset painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, that they shared their stories. Thomas told her about his childhood in Ohio, about parents who had died young and left him to make his own way in the world. He spoke of his first years in the territory, sleeping in a one-room cabin and fighting to establish his claim against both the elements and men who would have taken it from him. He had built the Double Eagle through sheer determination, but success had come at the cost of personal relationships and the simple human connections that made life meaningful. Alina, in turn, shared the pain of her marriage to Marcus, the years of walking on eggshells and making herself small to avoid his anger. She told Thomas about the night she had finally fought back, about the terror and shame that had driven her south to Colorado and eventually to his ranch. Do you think he's still looking for you? Thomas asked, his arm tightening protectively around her shoulders. I don't know, Alina admitted. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, certain I've heard his voice calling my name. But it's been 3 years. Maybe he's moved on. Maybe he's found someone else to torment. Thomas turned to face her, his eyes serious. Alina, I want you to know that no matter what happens with us, you're safe here. This ranch is your home for as long as you want it to be. And no one will hurt you while I have breath in my body. The sincerity in his voice brought tears to Alina's eyes. She had spent so many years feeling vulnerable and alone that the promise of protection felt almost too good to believe. Their secret romance continued through the autumn months, each stolen moment deepening their connection. Alina found herself humming while she worked, and Thomas smiled more than he had in years. Even the ranch hands noticed the change in their boss, though none suspected the cause. All except Jake Morrison. Jake had been watching Alina and Thomas with growing suspicion, noting the way their eyes met across the courtyard, the subtle changes in their behavior. His wounded shoulder had healed, but his resentment toward Alina's rejection and Thomas's protection of her had festered like an infection. One evening in late October, Jake followed Thomas to the hidden valley, confirming his suspicions when he saw his boss embrace the ranch's cook, Fury and jealousy burned in Jake's chest as he watched them together, and he began formulating a plan that would satisfy both his desire for revenge and his ambition to take control of the Double Eagle Ranch. Jake's opportunity came on a cold November morning when a stranger rode into the ranch asking questions. The man was tall and lean, with dark hair and cruel eyes that made Alina's blood run cold when she saw him through the kitchen window. She knew, with the terrible certainty of instinct, that Marcus had finally found her. Alina's hands shook as she kneaded bread, her mind racing with panic and possibilities. She could run again, disappear into the vast territory before Marcus could reach her. But the thought of leaving Thomas, of abandoning the first real happiness she had known in years, felt like dying. Jake Morrison appeared in the kitchen doorway, his smile cold and triumphant. "Interesting visitor we got today, Alina. Says he's looking for his wife, a woman who ran off about 3 years ago after attacking him with a skillet." Sound familiar? Alina's face went white, but she forced herself to continue working. "I don't know what you're talking about, Jake." "Oh, I think you do," Jake said, stepping closer. "And I think Mr. Hartwell might be very interested to learn about his cook's past. Unless, of course, we could come to some kind of arrangement." "What do you want?" Alina asked, though she already knew. "Same thing I've always wanted," Jake replied. "You. Marry me, Alina, and I'll make sure your husband never finds you. I'll tell him I never saw you. Send him on his way. But if you don't," he shrugged. "Well, a man has a right to his wife, doesn't he?" Alina stared at him, trapped between two hells. Before she could respond, Thomas appeared in the doorway, his face dark with anger. "Jake, I thought I told you to stay away from the kitchen." Jake's smile widened. "Just having a friendly conversation with Alina here about her husband." "Seems like there's a lot about your cook you don't know, boss." Thomas looked between them, sensing the undercurrent of menace in Jake's words. "What are you talking about?" "Ask her," Jake said, tipping his hat mockingly before walking away. Thomas turned to Alina, who was gripping the edge of the counter as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. "Alina, what's going on?" Before she could answer, Marcus appeared in the doorway, his presence filling the kitchen with malevolent energy. He was exactly as Alina remembered him, handsome in a cold way, with eyes that seemed to catalog everything and everyone as potential obstacles to his will. "Hello, wife," Marcus said, his voice deceptively gentle. "You've led me quite a chase." Thomas stepped protectively in front of Alina, his hand moving instinctively to the gun at his hip. "I think you're in the wrong place, friend." Marcus laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "I don't think so. That woman behind you is my lawfully wedded wife and she's coming home with me." "No," Alina said, finding her voice at last. "I won't go with you, Marcus. I won't ever go back to that life." Marcus's facade of civility slipped, revealing the rage beneath. "You don't have a choice, Alina. You're my wife and you'll do as I say. You can come willingly or I can take you, but you're coming either way." Thomas drew his gun in one smooth motion, the barrel pointing steadily at Marcus's chest. The lady said no. "I suggest you respect that and ride on." Marcus studied Thomas with calculating eyes. "So that's how it is. You've been keeping my wife warm, have you? Tell me, does she still wake up screaming in the night? Does she still flinch when you touch her too quickly?" Alina flinched at the cruel accuracy of his words, and Thomas's jaw tightened dangerously. "You've got 10 seconds to get off my land," Thomas said quietly. Marcus raised his hands in mock surrender. All right. I can see when I'm outnumbered. But this isn't over, Alina. I know where you are now, and I'm not leaving without you. Think about how many people might get hurt if you keep being stubborn." He backed out of the kitchen, his eyes never leaving Alina's face. Thomas didn't lower his gun until Marcus had mounted his horse and ridden away. Alina sank into a chair, her body shaking with the aftermath of fear and adrenaline. Thomas holstered his gun and knelt beside her, taking her hands in his. "Alina, look at me," he said gently. "Look at me." She raised her eyes to his, seeing nothing but love and determination in his gaze. "I meant what I said before," Thomas continued. "No one will hurt you while I'm alive. But I need to know everything. About him, about what happened between you, about what we're facing." Alina told him everything. The whole horrible story of her marriage and escape. Thomas listened without judgment, his anger growing not at her, but at the man who had terrorized her. When she finished, he pulled her into his arms. "You're not going back to him," he said fiercely. "I don't care what the law says about marriage. You're not going back to a man who hurt you." "But he's right," Alina said, tears streaming down her face. Legally, I'm still his wife. And if he causes trouble, people could get hurt. Your reputation, your business. I don't care about any of that. Thomas interrupted. Elena, I love you. Do you understand me? I love you, and I will not let him take you away. Elena clung to him, drawing strength from his conviction even as fear gnawed at her heart. She knew Marcus, knew how cunning and relentless he could be. He wouldn't give up easily, and he would use every weapon at his disposal to get what he wanted. Over the next several days, Marcus made his presence felt throughout the territory. He visited the town, spreading his story to anyone who would listen. A grieving husband searching for his runaway wife, a woman who had attacked him and stolen his money before disappearing in the night. Some people sympathized with him, while others, who knew Elena's character, remained skeptical. But doubt began to creep through the community like a poison. Jake Morrison watched these developments with satisfaction, seeing an opportunity to advance his own interests. He began meeting secretly with Marcus, sharing information about the ranch's routines and suggesting ways to pressure Elena into submission. The tension came to a head on a cold December morning when Marcus and 3 hired guns surrounded the ranch house. Elena saw them from the kitchen window and ran to find Thomas, who was in the barn saddling his horse. Thomas, she gasped, Marcus is here. He brought men with him. Thomas's face hardened as he checked his weapons. Stay in the house. Elena, no matter what happens, stay inside. But Elena followed him to the porch, unable to bear the thought of cowering while the man she loved faced danger on her behalf. The ranch hands had seen the riders approaching and were emerging from the bunkhouse, hands near their guns. Marcus sat his horse in the center of the courtyard, flanked by his hired men. He looked every inch the wronged husband, his face a mask of righteous determination. Elena, he called out, I've come to take you home. Don't make this harder than it has to be. She's not going anywhere with you, Thomas replied, stepping forward with his rifle in his hands. Marcus smiled coldly. Mr. Hartwell, is it? You've been harboring my wife, alienating her affections, and living in sin with another man's woman. The law is on my side here. The law doesn't give you the right to beat a woman. Thomas shot back. Everyone in this territory knows what kind of man you are. Do they? Marcus asked. Or do they know what kind of man you are? A rich rancher who steals other men's wives, who corrupts decent women with his money and influence. Elena stepped forward, her fear overcome by anger. I'm not your property, Marcus. I never was. I won't let you destroy these good people because of your obsession with controlling me. Marcus's mask slipped, revealing the fury beneath. You're my wife, Elena. You swore vows before God and man, and you will honor them. Those vows included promises you broke long ago. Elena replied, her voice growing stronger with each word. You promised to love and cherish me, but all you ever did was hurt and control me. I won't be your victim anymore. The standoff stretched taut, both sides knowing that violence was only a heartbeat away. It was Jake Morrison who tipped the balance, emerging from behind the barn with his gun drawn and pointed at Thomas's back. Sorry, boss, Jake said with false regret, but a man's got to look out for his own interests. Thomas spun around, but Jake already had the drop on him. Marcus laughed triumphantly. Excellent timing, Mr. Morrison. Now, Elena, you're going to walk over here and mount up behind me, or Mr. Hartwell is going to have a very bad day. Elena looked between the 2 men she despised most in the world, both using threats against Thomas to control her. But as she took a step toward Marcus, she saw something that gave her hope. The ranch hands were moving into position, using the buildings for cover. Cookie, the old cook who had taught Elena everything she knew about feeding cowboys, had emerged from the bunkhouse with a shotgun. Even Maria, the Mexican woman who helped with laundry, was visible at the corner of the house with Thomas's spare rifle. These people, Elena realized, were risking their lives not just for their boss but for her. They had accepted her, protected her, and made her part of their family in a way that Marcus's legal claim could never touch. You know what, Marcus? Elena said, her voice carrying across the courtyard with newfound strength. I've spent 3 years running from you, 3 years afraid of what you might do if you found me. But looking at you now, I realize something. You're just a man, a small, cruel man who gets his power from making others afraid, and I'm not afraid of you anymore. Marcus's face contorted with rage. You'll be afraid when I... His words were cut off by the crack of Cookie's shotgun. The old cowboy hadn't aimed to kill, but his warning shot sent Marcus's horse rearing and scattered his hired guns, who suddenly found themselves surrounded by determined ranch hands. In the chaos that followed, Jake tried to shoot Thomas, but Alina threw herself forward, striking Jake's arm just as he pulled the trigger. The shot went wide, and Thomas spun around, his fist connecting with Jake's jaw in a blow that sent the foreman sprawling. Marcus tried to control his frightened horse while reaching for his gun, but Cookie's second shot, this one aimed more carefully, sent Marcus tumbling from his saddle. He landed hard in the dust, his shoulder bleeding from Cookie's buckshot. The hired guns, seeing their employer down and outnumbered, threw down their weapons and raised their hands. Within minutes, the threat that had haunted Alina for so long was neutralized. Marcus was writhing in the dirt, and Jake Morrison was unconscious at Thomas's feet. As the dust settled and the ranch hands secured the prisoners, Thomas pulled Alina into his arms, both of them shaking with relief and adrenaline. "It's over," he whispered into her hair. "It's finally over." But Alina pulled back to look at him, her eyes serious. "No, Thomas, it's not over. Marcus was right about one thing. Legally, I'm still his wife. Even with witnesses to his violence, even with everything that's happened. The law might still side with him, and I won't let that destroy what you've built here." Thomas cupped her face in his hands. "Alina, listen to me. I don't care about the law. I don't care about scandal or reputation or anything else. I care about you. We'll figure this out together." "How?" Alina asked, tears streaming down her face. "How can we be together when the whole world says I belong to someone else?" The answer came from an unexpected source. The town doctor, who had been summoned to tend to Marcus's wounds, was also the local judge. As he bandaged the injured man, he listened to the testimonies of everyone present, including several ranch hands who had witnessed Jake's betrayal and Marcus's threats. "Mrs. Martinez," the judge said finally, using the name Alina had taken when she fled Colorado, "in my 20 years on this frontier, I've seen enough domestic violence to know it when I hear it. While I cannot dissolve your marriage, that requires a court proceeding, I can and will issue a restraining order forbidding this man from coming within 50 miles of you or this ranch. And given his behavior today, including bringing armed men to threaten lawful citizens, he'll be spending the next several months in territorial prison." Marcus, despite his pain, started to protest, but the judge silenced him with a look that could have frozen the desert. "Furthermore," the judge continued, "I happen to know that Colorado has recently passed legislation making it easier for women to obtain divorces in cases of documented abuse. Mrs. Martinez, if you choose to pursue that course, I will provide testimony regarding what I witnessed here today." Alina felt hope blooming in her chest for the first time in years. "You mean I could actually be free of him, legally free? It will take time and legal proceedings," the judge cautioned, "but yes, the frontier is changing, Mrs. Martinez. We're beginning to recognize that marriage should be a partnership, not ownership." As Marcus was loaded into a wagon bound for prison and Jake was dismissed from the ranch in disgrace, Alina and Thomas stood together on the porch of the main house, watching the sun set over their land. Their land, Alina dared to think. "It's going to be a long road," Thomas said quietly. "The legal proceedings, the gossip, the challenges of changing people's minds about what's acceptable and what isn't." Alina leaned against his shoulder, drawing strength from his presence. "I know, but for the first time in my life, I feel like I have a choice in my own future. And I choose you, Thomas Hartwell. I choose this life, this land, these people who stood up for me today." Thomas turned to face her, his eyes bright with love and possibility. "Alina Martinez, when you're legally free, when all this is behind us, will you marry me? Not because society says you have to belong to someone, but because you choose to build a life with me." Alina's answer was a kiss that tasted of tears and hope and the promise of tomorrow. Around them, the Double Eagle Ranch settled into evening, its people secure in the knowledge that they had fought for justice and won. 6 months later, Alina stood in the same kitchen where she had once cowered in fear, but now she wore a white dress and wildflowers in her hair. The divorce had been granted. Marcus was serving his sentence, and the entire territory had turned out for the wedding of Thomas Hartwell and Alina Martinez. As they exchanged vows in the courtyard, surrounded by the ranch hands who had become their family and the community that had embraced their love story, Alina marveled at the journey that had brought them to this moment. She had come to the Double Eagle broken and afraid, seeking nothing more than survival. Instead, she had found healing love and the courage to fight for her own happiness. Thomas slipped the ring onto her finger, his voice steady and sure as he promised to love and protect her not as property, but as an equal partner in all things. When they kissed to seal their union, the cheer that went up from the assembled crowd echoed across the rangeland, a sound of pure joy that seemed to bless not just their marriage, but the changing world that had made it possible. That evening, as the celebration continued around them, Alina and Thomas slipped away to their hidden valley, where wildflowers bloomed eternal and the stream sang its ancient song. They sat together on their fallen log, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky, and spoke of the future they would build together. A ranch that would thrive, children who would know love without fear, and a legacy of standing up for what was right even when it was difficult. Alina had learned that true strength came not from avoiding conflict, but from facing it with courage and the support of those who loved you. Thomas had discovered that all the land and cattle in the world meant nothing without someone to share it with. And together, they had proven that love could indeed conquer the obstacles that a harsh world placed in its path. As the night deepened around them, they made their way back to the house they would now share, ready to begin the next chapter of their story. Behind them, the Double Eagle Ranch spread out under the starlight, a testament to the power of hard work, determination, and the belief that every person deserved the right to choose their own destiny. The frontier was changing, one heart at a time, and Alina and Thomas Hartwell were proud to be part of that transformation. They had learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you could do was simply refuse to give up on love, even when the whole world seemed arrayed against it. Their story would be told for generations, a reminder that courage and compassion could triumph over cruelty and control, and that sometimes the most unlikely partnerships could change not just individual lives but entire communities. In the years that followed, the Double Eagle would become known not just for its fine cattle and prosperous operation, but as a place where people could find refuge and opportunity regardless of their past. Alina's kitchen would welcome countless souls in need of a meal and a kind word, while Thomas's leadership would help shape a territory where justice and mercy walked hand in hand. But on this night, they were simply a man and a woman who had found each other against all odds, ready to face whatever tomorrow might bring, secure in the knowledge that they would face it together.